Welcome to Retail Connect 2020. I'm Carol Strohecker, Dean of the College of Design, which is the home of the University of Minnesota's Retail Merchandising Program. I'm proud to lead the College of Design for many reasons, not the least of which is that we host a robust range of design disciplines, including retail merchandising, which is one of our largest majors. While a significant portion of retail education is focused on business, having a retail program situated within a design college at a major research university distinguishes this program and our graduates. They stand out not only for their business and industry acumen, but also for their deep understanding and perspective on consumer-centered products and services. Our graduates also understand the importance of research-based design and decision-making in all facets of business, and they have a remarkably creative approach. They don't just solve problems, they generate solutions. This year, the COVID-19 pandemic has posed unprecedented challenges to public health while revealing fault lines in populations' vulnerability and access to resources. The university has responded with careful planning to keep our students, faculty, and staff safe. The College of Design is adapting by questioning our educational traditions as we innovate with new technologies to support hybrid models of creative learning. I'm honored that our team, community, and industry partners are affirming these efforts with enthusiastic support by continuing to sponsor our events and our Center for Retail Design and Innovation. I'd like to acknowledge our sponsors listed on this slide and our CRDI partners, including Kohl's, Decor, and the Creative Partners Group. I'm also excited to share that this year we will be awarding 6 student leadership scholarships made possible by our platinum and gold sponsors. In addition, 50% of our funds raised tonight will support the College of Design's scholarship fund that advances diversity, equity, inclusion, and access in retail education. Thank you to our sponsors and supporters. As many of you know, we offer this unique event through collaborations across the College of Design, including faculty, advisory board members, student leaders, our alumni relations and advancement offices, staff in the Department of Design, Housing, and Apparel, and many members of the retail industry who are here with us tonight. I want to take a moment to recognize and thank a few of the key people who helped make this event happen. Our planning team includes committee chairs Jamie Curtis, Senior Vice President of Brand Management at Decor Apparel, and Heather Harnish, VP of Space and Transitions at Target. Retail Merchandising Board President and alumna Jill Hamburger. Interim Department Head and Director of the Center for Retail Design and Innovation, Dr. Hae-Young Kim. Assistant Director of the Center for Retail Design and Innovation and Teaching Specialist, Peggy Lord. And our stellar Director of Alumni Relations, Laurie Mulberg. In addition, the team works closely with our retail merchandising faculty listed here. Our Retail Merchandising Advisory Board members play an important role supporting student learning, developing industry connections, contributing time, talent, and financial support, and engaging many of the companies and professionals who are here with us tonight. Serving in partnership with our advisory board, I want to thank our Retail Merchandising Student Leadership Board members who help facilitate professional development and networking opportunities for students through events and hands-on experiences with industry partners. Together, our Retail Advisory Board volunteers play a vital role in shaping and hosting Retail Connect each year. You will soon see why we are so grateful for their leadership and service in that capacity, as well as many others. With that, I'll turn things over to our moderator for this evening, Virajita Singh. Virajita serves as the Associate Vice Provost for the Office of Equity and Diversity at the University of Minnesota and is also a Senior Research Fellow and Adjunct Faculty Member at the College of Design. Thank you and enjoy the event.
Thank you, Carol. Welcome everyone to our 11th annual Virtual Retail Connect. We have an exciting program this evening with our pre-recorded keynote speaker, Allison Peterson of Best Buy, and our virtual panelists, Mark Irwin of Best Buy, Greg Cunningham of US Bank, and Alyssa Montbryan of Pacifier, sharing their insights on tonight's topic, Be a Catalyst for Change, Leadership Lessons to Navigate Retail Transformative Times. In a moment, we will move to the main event, our pre-recorded keynote presentation by Allison Peterson of Best Buy, followed by a discussion with our featured industry panelists. We will also have about 15 minutes for questions from the audience following the panel discussion. So in preparation for that part of the event, we invite you to submit your questions at any time by clicking the Q&A button below, and they will be addressed near the end as time permits. We will conclude this evening with awards and recognition of our scholarship recipients and a few closing remarks. So let's get started. It is my pleasure to introduce Allison Peterson, Chief Customer Officer of Best Buy. Allison holds a key role at Best Buy, directing the company's customer strategy and business initiatives. Since joining Best Buy in 2004, she has held various leadership roles within marketing and e-commerce, including Vice President of Category Marketing and Vice President of Brand Strategy. Allison is a graduate of Indiana University and serves on the executive committee of the board of directors for the Children's Theater Company of Minneapolis. We are very fortunate tonight to have Allison join us to share her journey at Best Buy and what she sees for the future of retail. Please join me in welcoming Allison Peterson.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. Hello, everyone. I'm Allison Peterson, Chief Customer Officer at Best Buy. I'm incredibly honored to have the opportunity to speak with you all today. It's obviously disappointing that we couldn't be together in person, but I love that technology has kept us all connected. I've been working in retail my entire professional career, so today I thought I would share some lessons I've learned along the way and give you a glimpse into what the retail landscape looks like in today's environment. My hope is that by the end of this, you'll have learned something new and feel inspired to lead a career in retail. Before we dig into my lessons, I thought I'd share a little bit about myself. I'm a wife and mom of two amazing kiddos. Yes, I realize I might be a bit biased. My daughter Maddie's 16 and my son Oliver is 7, so they keep me pretty busy. Like many of you, my family is the center of my universe. They keep me grounded and are the best support system a girl could ask for. I could not do what I do or have accomplished many of my career aspirations without the unyielding support of my husband, Josh. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, where I split my time living between my mom and my dad. My parents own their own retail businesses, so it's been in my DNA from very early on. My mom owned a card and gift store, and my dad owned a liquor and wine store. I learned my work ethic from my mother. No one worked harder than my mother. She was an independent business owner for 30 years, so you can imagine what that took. I learned how important relationships are from my dad. He has a network that's expansive. He can still talk your ear off to this day. My dad's the guy who has a guy for everything, and he is my biggest cheerleader. I had an awesome childhood, yet I really look forward to the opportunity to leave the nest and head to college out of state. For me, I wanted the quintessential college experience. I wanted a big school, a big business program with big sports and big social life. And that led me to Indiana University, which is where I met my people. I majored in marketing and minored in international business, and I spent a semester studying abroad where I learned all types of life lessons, including how to pretend you were going to school while visiting every country in the European Union. My mom still gives me a hard time about how I sold her on that one. And yes, I was a sorority girl. While it sounds a bit cliche, what I didn't realize then is that these women would truly turn into my lifelong friends. After graduating, I joined the Associate Buyer Training Program for a little company called Dayton's, which was part of Target Corporation. Arriving at Dayton's confirmed my suspicions that I loved retail and I loved fashion. I love the dynamic and changing pace. I love driving a business. I love being part of a team, and I love the opportunity to constantly do something new. I spent the first 8 years of my career in merchant and inventory roles, and I loved every single minute of it. Then out of the blue, or what felt like out of the blue to me, Target decided to sell the department stores to May Company. I consulted my career advisor, my father, as he was the one who said, "You realize by Target selling the department stores, the local Minneapolis buying office is probably someday going to close. So you should probably figure out what that means to you." Unfortunately, he was right. For those of you that are local and remember, that did happen. At the time, Maddie was only 4 months old. I was at home and I decided to take an informational interview because of my dad's advice. I met with a woman who used to work at Dayton's who was working at Best Buy on bestbuy.com. I ended up leaving the informational interview with a job offer, and 2 weeks later, ended up starting with Best Buy in November of 2004, right before Thanksgiving. Little did I know what Black Friday meant at this retailer. I started in e-commerce at Best Buy in a hybrid merchandising and marketing role. And after spending 5 years in this space, my love for digital grew and I wanted to have a bigger impact. I moved to marketing to help drive our company's transition to digital. And through that time, I held a variety of roles in marketing, including VP of brand strategy, category marketing, and ultimately CMO. I also had the amazing opportunity to run bestbuy.com for the last few years leading up to the pandemic. While leading marketing in our e-commerce business, we were simultaneously building a customer experience practice. When the pandemic hit, our CEO asked me to take over this role full time, as placing the customer at the forefront of our strategy and decision-making was going to be critical to our ongoing success. I've worn many different hats at Best Buy over the last 16 years and learned so many life lessons along the way. However, the most important lessons I've learned came from a significant health event that I experienced about 4 years ago. I've affectionately referred to these as the 5 lessons I learned from brain surgery. This is a chapter in my life that I like to call #BrainScoop, the term my neurologist used to tell me what they had done to my brain. We can laugh about it now, though at the time I was horrifically offended. I told my husband I was going to find a new doctor, and I quickly thereafter did. A couple of ground rules as it relates to these lessons. First, please know it's okay to react to this story however you see fit. It's okay to laugh, and it's okay to cry about what I'm going to share with you. As I share this story, I have realized that it's highly personal to some people. So please know that if I'm making light of what happened to me, it's not that I don't value your own experience. It's just my experience. And it's some of the way I find my own catharsis within it. Second, it's about feelings. And I know that might make some people uncomfortable. But like I said earlier, I hope something I share today really resonates with you and you subsequently take action, because that's what ultimately helped me. And finally, it's really important for me to tell you that this is personal, and I do still want to share it because it's who I am. I'm a classically trained oversharer. I do feel like it's my responsibility as a leader to not only share what I know professionally, but also lead more broadly by sharing my own life experience. It's important to have some of that context because some of this stuff can be a little hard to hear. So with all that preamble, my first lesson after having brain surgery is listen to your body. It's trying to tell you something. How many times has someone said to you, you're having X ailment because your body's trying to tell you something, you need to slow down? I'm sure you can all relate to a time where someone said that to you. I'm telling you, this is scientifically true. Your body creates pain as a defense mechanism. So my advice is listen to it. For me, I have been battling headaches for years. And one day in May of 2016, I decided I just couldn't handle it anymore. It's truly amazing the amount of people who remember the last day I was in the office and seeing me, and they all told me after the fact, you just didn't really look like you felt very well. And it turns out I didn't, and I wasn't well. I went to see my doctor, and he said he was fairly certain it was just migraines, but he was going to send me in for a CAT scan just to double check. So I went home, I made my kids dinner, and I left Oliver in Maddie's capable care. She had just completed some babysitting classes, so this decision felt on the up and up. And I said, I'll be back in 30 minutes. I went in and got the CAT scan, and they kept me there for what's called a live read, which is when the doctor reads you the actual results while you're still at the imaging center. My doctor got on the phone with me and he said, Allison, I can't believe I'm going to tell you this, but there's blood in your brain and you need to go to the ER ASAP and you can't drive yourself. Thank God it turned out that my best friend lived 3 minutes away from where I had the CT. She came and picked me up. The ER took this MRI on the right, which found that I had something they called a cavernous angioma, a cluster of blood vessels. Mine happened to look like broccoli that was bleeding in my brain. They admitted me for observation while my husband flew home on the red eye from his business trip in Vegas. My mother-in-law went over to stay with the kids, and I sent my parents a text saying that I'd call them in the morning. While it did all turn out okay, that night it got a bit serious. I had 4 grand mal seizures in the hospital, and as a result, had that piece of broccoli removed 2 days later on the morning of May 18th. The picture on the left is the space where the mass was. The good news is it was out, and I was told I was going to be okay. However, had I not gone to the doctor that day, I probably wouldn't be here today. So this is a really big, important life lesson. Listen to your body. It's trying to tell you something. Okay, I swear it gets happier from here. Lesson 2, relationships mean everything. I truly mean this. In my darkest moments, my relationships have helped me through, and at the end of the day are the most important thing. Nurture and appreciate your relationships, as they will absolutely see you through. I cannot tell you how Best Buy leaders, my team, and Best Buy as a company took care of me during this time in my life. We had a great leader with our company for 25 years. Her name is Sherry Ballard. Sherry asked me when I came back if I really felt how much I was missed and appreciated by the team while I was away. It was something she had always wondered. And I said, oh my God, more than you know. When I came back to work 4 months later, there was a sign hanging on the door outside of my office signed by my team. I still have the sign in my office to this day. Many of the people that saw me through this incredibly challenging time continue to be close friends and colleagues today, and I'm so grateful for them. My third lesson is take care of you. This couldn't be truer today in the context of a pandemic. Work can be addicting in a really good way, and we're all super passionate about what we do, and we give it 1,000%. However, it will take everything we give, so we have to create boundaries. When I was away for those 4 months, I had the opportunity to truly disconnect. I mean, I had to. It was the only way I was going to rehab, which looking back was so important because it helped me gain new perspective. And what happens is when we don't step away from it, we get sucked into it, and then we lose some of our perspective. Finding your own balancing act and the notion of self-care is super important. Take the time to do the things that fill you up. It will absolutely make a difference. This is the perfect segue to my next lesson, which is to make time for the small stuff. As I was working my way up the corporate ladder, I realized that I was present at all my kids' major milestones. I really tried to prioritize being for them and still do. The whole world is different now, but at the time, I made the choir concert or the soccer game or the school presentation. But while I was out recovering, I had an opportunity to be more engaged in those not so major moments. And one of the things I did while I was on medical leave was attend my son's first preschool field trip. I wasn't feeling great that day, but I thought, you know what, I'm gonna go surprise him. So I drove the 45 minutes to the apple orchard where they were gonna be, and I got there before the bus arrived. You all should have seen how happy he was when he saw me. His teacher actually took a picture of him coming off the bus, and we had the most amazing couple hours at the apple orchard. And I was there for my son's first preschool field trip, which normally in my working life would have never tripped a major milestone. So making time for the small stuff is worth it. And know that the amazing support network I referenced earlier will have your back to create those memories and to take the time you need. And finally, no matter how tough it is, it most likely isn't brain surgery. During the hardest or most stressful times at work, we have to remind ourselves that we will get through it. It will not kill us. I remind myself of these 5 lessons often, especially when I lose my own perspective. And all that leads me to where I am today, doing what I love for a company I love. Next, I'm going to give you a little insight of how we're thinking about the customer at Best Buy, how we're navigating the pandemic, and why you should be excited for a career in retail. We are accelerating our strategy at Best Buy by taking a customer-obsessed, digital-first, and human-delivered approach to our work. Let's talk about what obsession means in this context. In this case, customer obsession means putting the customer at the heart of all we do by anticipating their needs, listening, learning, and applying those insights to create lovable, seamless experiences. If you were to just look in a dictionary, obsession is when you literally have an idea or thought that continually dominates a person's mind. This is what we believe is the path to customer obsession. So let's talk a little bit about why we chose that word. We debated the word obsessed when talking about customer obsession because it's provocative, but it's really intended to be. It elicits thought and emotion and debate, and that's a good thing because we need to continue to push ourselves. We need to set a bar high and always be asking ourselves, what more can we do to serve our customer? To keep up, we need to be continually obsessing over their needs and their expectations. And so we reviewed research from several CX experts to understand the spectrum of how companies are serving customers today. And the evidence was really clear that those that were customer obsessed had greater success and resiliency. So let's talk a little bit about that spectrum. We found that organizations ranked how they were serving customers today on a spectrum from transaction-focused to customer-obsessed. Transaction-focused companies focused on generating transactions or creating the best product and service and then seeking out customers to fit what they'd created. Customer-aware companies are oriented towards serving customers and understanding their unique needs. While customer-obsessed companies consistently listen to customers, test and learn, and reapply those learnings. They are curious, optimistic, and have leaders who coach and reward employees based on behaving this way. So they truly incent them by the way they behave in taking and listening to feedback and adjusting. The big question we asked ourselves was, where were we on this spectrum? And the answer was that we weren't where we wanted to be, but now we knew where we were going because we had defined it. Putting those words to paper is a really powerful thing because it helps you create accountability. And in order to be customer obsessed, we have to be constantly learning and anticipating where our customers want. And as a result, we pay a lot of attention to what's going on with our customers at any given point in time. And we have through this entire pandemic. And since the start of the pandemic, customer sentiment has been varied. We saw at the start of the crisis, people were hopeful and optimistic while simultaneously feeling fearful of what the future held given both the virus and the state of the economy. However, unfortunately, feelings of hope have declined as consumers realize that life is not going to return to normal anytime soon. Overall consumer sentiment was down year over year in July and August, even with COVID cases slowing. The good news is it rose in September to the highest level since the coronavirus pandemic began. The index of customer confidence rose to 101.8 in September from 86.3 in August. It was the biggest one-month increase in 17 years. However, this result is still lower than last year, and there's still a long way to get back to pre-pandemic levels. It's important we pay attention to overall sentiment so we understand the customer's mindset to best meet their needs. I recently read a CNN article that said some 2/3 of the US economy rely on consumer spending. So how people feel about this recovery is an important piece of the puzzle as the country tries desperately to get back to normal. The economy continued to move in the right direction in September. Though most economic measures are still lower than pre-pandemic levels, they are improving month to month. In addition to the confidence measures I just mentioned, the unemployment rate improved from August to September, hourly wages are generally up, and inflation has remained low. This all helps enable a rebound in consumer spending. Consumer spending has largely been driven by purchases of physical goods as consumers were forced to shift out of experiences like travel. We've obviously also seen government aid influence the current state of our economy in a massive way. All of this said, we are also aware that the pandemic is impacting people differently. Not everyone is experiencing the same benefits from the recovery, and that things can turn on a dime in this environment, as evidenced by seeing the single largest GDP drop in US history earlier in the pandemic. Given the way consumers are adjusting to living in this new norm, the need for technology has never been higher. In fact, technology share of wallet is the highest it's been in 60 years. Consumers are shifting their behavior at a rapid pace and massively accelerating their adoption of technologies that are enabling them to feel safe while also meeting their needs. Early on in the pandemic, we set a few key objectives to be leveraged in the context of our decision-making: to keep our employees and customers safe, and to ensure we have a viable and thriving company on the other side of the pandemic. In fact, our CEO, Corey Berry, would tell you the empathy for our customers and employees has been a cornerstone of how we've navigated the pandemic. In the spirit of customer and employee obsession, we made several decisions about our operating model to prioritize safety. Early on, we proactively closed our stores and moved to a curbside pickup model in only 48 hours. Prior to then, we'd only rolled out curbside pickup to 200 stores. We stopped going into people's homes and we worked on other ways to still get consumers the products they needed. And when we began reopening the stores and re-entering people's homes, it was only with the utmost precaution and diligence. I'm incredibly proud to say that since the start of the pandemic, more than 97% of customers surveyed indicated that we made them feel safe. And we believe the credibility we garnered will, over time, create more loyal customers and subsequently more revenue for the brand. Heading into holiday, we want to continue to keep our customers safe, as well as help them feel confident, appreciated, and excited. So we're still prioritizing keeping them safe, but we also have a renewed focus on creating feelings of excitement. Customers are craving a break from the overall emotions of the pandemic, and we believe we can play a role in bringing them joy. This is what customer obsession is all about. As current and future retail professionals, we have such an amazing opportunity to create change and to truly have that change deliver results for our company. When I look back at my own career, I think there are a few things that are consistent for me: being a change agent and always being focused on the customer. Thank you for listening and giving me the opportunity to speak to all of you today. I hope you and your families stay well. I look forward to connecting with you all in person someday soon.
Thank you, Allison. Tonight's panel discussion will be focused on our theme, Be a Catalyst for Change. We will hear lessons learned from our panelists that represent 3 Minneapolis-based companies, from a small entrepreneurial retailer to a Fortune 500 company, where they're leading change during these transformative times. Our panelists for this evening include Mark Irvin, the Chief Inclusion and Diversity Officer for Best Buy, Greg Cunningham, the Chief Diversity Officer and Senior Vice President for US Bank, and Alyssa Montbryant, CEO and proprietor of Pacifier. To kick this off, we'll introduce our panelists with an opening icebreaker question. So panelists, please take a minute or two to introduce yourselves and answer our first question. If you had to pick just one word to describe 2020 so far, what is it? Let's start with Mark.
Well, let me first say how powerful, how impactful, and how personal was what Allison just shared. I mean, there's so many golden nuggets in that. If I was to pick one word, it would be transformative. You know, this has been a year we've all learned how to adapt to situations that I'm sure most of us would have never thought we would see in our own lifetimes. You know, from a deadly virus to extreme social injustice playing out on the screens of our television sets, to business closures, job loss. But we've also seen the ability to stand with someone that is a total stranger and to say that I will not leave your side until change is exhibited in our society and in how people are being treated. Transformative.
Thank you, Mark. Alyssa?
Well, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here. Love the word transformative, but when I was reflecting on this past year, the year, typical years, I would say change, and change does apply to this year as well. But the word I picked for this year is perseverance. So a lot of what's happened this year as a business leader, as a strategist, you can't even predict, it's an unpredictable year. Nobody could have even in their business planning planned for what has happened. And basically, I think for small businesses in particular, it's rolling up our sleeves, realizing that we don't control a lot this year, and persevering and seeing how we can move through it in a way that makes both our companies, ourselves, and our communities better.
Wonderful, Alyssa. Greg, what about you?
Virajita, good evening, and good evening, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be with you. My word, Virajita, is unstoppable. I was on a call with someone very early on in this summer, and I asked this young lady, a young student, how she was doing, and she said, "I'm unstoppable." And it was just a word that really stuck with me because everything about it suggests that we know that we're in a very difficult time. We're in a time of great chaos. But I'm incredibly hopeful that things are going to be different this time and that we're not going back we're looking at what is in front of us together, and this notion of being unstoppable, even when we are most fatigued and we're having those feelings of doubt and anxiety. I think this notion of unstoppable, which I would equate to a lot of what Allison was talking about as well, right, in her journey. My word is unstoppable, Rajda.
Exactly. Thank you so much. All the three words actually connected to what Allison was talking about. Thank you. So I'm going to start with the first question to you about the challenges we've faced in 2020. There have been so many challenges this year alone. What are the largest challenges that retail industry has faced in 2020, according to you?
Yeah, so I think for me, the biggest change is the last big change in retail. So I'll put this to year 2007. That was the year that the first iPhone was introduced and really started to create the move towards online behaviors for our consumers and expedited it. So what became really important for brick and mortar retailers at that time was omni-channel and experiential retail. So experiential retail is basically what all brick and mortars, particularly local shops, tried to move towards, which is how do you create that community and create that magical feeling within your retail stores. So things like at Pacifier, what we do is we do classes, we have big kids play areas while the parents are shopping, we have snacks for little ones, beverages for the adults that are shopping. And basically the biggest challenge of this year with COVID is all of those things that we did to make our experiences magical actually would create a really big risk if we tried to do them right now for both our employees as well as our customers. So we had to really entirely rethink, and I think a lot of retailers had to rethink this concept of experiential retail and think about how to create those connections when you can't be face-to-face with the customer. So an example of one way we did this is curbside pickup. We don't just go and take the bag and drop it in somebody's car. These excursions to pick up stuff are sometimes folks' only opportunity is to get outside the house. Sometimes they bring their little ones. So we offered curbside pickup with me dressed up as a shark, right? So we still tried to figure out ways we could bring that joy and create that connection in a way that was authentic to us, even though we couldn't be where we want to be, which is face-to-face with all these cute little new babies, the parents and the little ones.
Wonderful. Thank you. Mark, would you like to go?
Yeah, Alyssa, I love that agility that you guys displayed. Prior to me assuming my current role at Best Buy, I was a leader within our supply chain teams. And, retail has been on this journey of adaptation. This journey has put our customers and the customer experience at the center of everything we're doing to evolve the service and the shopping experience that we're providing. I think 2020 and the teams and the systems that support the customer experience have truly been put to the test. Things like being thoughtful around decisions that matter most to people. I think that's what the best retailers are able to do. I think first and foremost, you heard it in Allison's story, putting our employees and our customers and their safety really at the top of our list around what we were going to do. And, early on as the COVID crisis was just beginning to materialize, we made a decision, much like Alyssa shared, that we would move quickly to a curbside shopping experience. We also made the decision early on to stop delivering into our customers' homes until we were sure we could do that and do it safely and responsibly. I think in the end of this story, we're going to find that the unsung heroes of what we did in retail will be the employees that showed up every single day to our stores and our distribution centers, and our service employees that felt incredibly supported because leaders got behind them and ensured they were safe. I mean, if you think about what would have happened without that type of leadership presence and dedication, store shelves would have been empty, deliveries would have stopped, people would have run out of critical supplies. I think this orientation to people first is what made the great retailers stand out.
That's a wonderful takeaway from your experience. I'm going to pivot to a question that's about pivoting, actually, around COVID-19. How did your retail organizations pivot to address the challenges of this global pandemic? Essentially, how did you keep the lights on for your business, addressing protecting your customers while also being engaged with your family? Greg, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Rajat. Yeah, I think pivot, if I could have had a second word, that pivot would have been it, right? I think for us, the retail aspect of our business, typically plays out certainly in our branches and digital, just like everybody else. But, it was difficult because the need for the products and services and things that we offer, touched people's lives in so many different ways, from people's ability to keep the lights on, to pay the rent, and do all the things that they needed to do from that perspective. And so we had to really think about how we could adjust our products and services and our requirements around those so that people could continue to just sort of function every day. And then there was the notion of, how we continue to support small businesses and make capital available to small businesses, whether it be through the PPP program or other forms of capital deployment. So, I guess what I would say is that we had to build additional flexibility into our business model. We had to, sort of think about those thresholds and risk in very different ways. The financial services business is built upon risk mitigation and compliance and all these other things. And so we had to look at all of those programs and practices very different, Virajita, so that we could be responsive to these new customer needs and demands that were being placed on all of us by the changes that were happening in society.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. And it's good to understand what was happening in a big corporation like US Bank. But let's turn to Alyssa to see what was happening in your retail business.
Yeah, so we did have to close our stores for a couple of months. So that was definitely a really big challenge for a brick and mortar retailer. But luckily, we have been investing in our website for quite a while. So that was very fortuitous. So we did the typical things. We moved our business online. We did free delivery, free curbside, like we talked about. Virtual shopping appointments. So of course, parents do need those car seats to take their little ones home from the hospital. So if you think about during the beginning of the pandemic, it was very stressful for new parents because they had to, sometimes their spouse or partner couldn't even go to the hospital with them. So we wanted to be there for them via phone, via video, via private shopping appointments, basically whatever way made them feel most comfortable, as well as kept our employees and team members safe. But we still wanted to be there for them and be that resource that we're known to be. So a lot of the typical adjustments, and then went on from there.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the next question. Amidst a global pandemic, a decades-long movement is groundswelling to foster more diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace environments. What has your organization enacted to educate and inspire your company's employees and community? And let's start with Mark this time.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we've always had this commitment and this vision of creating, really an amazing place to work, a place that people can show up and be, their authentic selves. And, this emphasis of being authentic is about really a culture of inclusion. And I always think about a place where you feel incredibly welcomed, invited, and you can have a strong sense of belonging. You think so often in our lives, there's a bit of a pressure to fit in. But I think great cultures create something that we call psychological safety. Psychological safety means that I can show up and bring my superpower, my best self to work every single day. And so we actually launched something to actually help us inspire that in leaders across Best Buy. We call it our inclusive leadership behaviors. And how often have you heard these words at work? Courage, empathy, vulnerability, and grace. I thought I would never hear the word grace in a work function. But if you think about the essence of that word and what it really means, it means that you can engage me in a conversation because you just care. And you might make some mistakes in it because we're different. But I'll have the grace in which to overlook your mistake and encourage us to come together. I think that has been incredibly powerful at launching a workforce and a work team to come together when so many things out there would try to divide us.
I agree that grace is not a word we hear in our work environments often, and I've heard it actually twice today. So Greg, what does this bring up for you in your context?
Yeah, so many things. I mean, so many similar things to what Mark shared. So I'll try to not double down on those and just say that, the other thing I think about that is really transformed in our workplace is this notion of compassionate leadership. I think there is as leaders, we're all sort of hardwired to always show up with the answers. And we've tried to get leaders to understand that there are three really important things to do here. The first one is to listen, that we need to listen differently. Like we need to have different conversations. Leaders need to ask new questions and really try to create these safe spaces, this psychological safety that Mark had talked about, where people can actually come and have conversation and oftentimes even disagree. Like I don't even think it's important that when we're talking about these issues that are happening in larger society, there are a lot of these things that used to be taboo to talk about in the workplace. We used to never use the word racism. We would never talk about privilege. We would never have these honest conversations that are critical to have now if we're going to move forward together towards greater prosperity for everybody. So this notion of listening and having different conversations was important. The second thing was to learn. It's to sort of open your mind up, as I said, as leaders, to not always feel like you have to be the teacher in the room, but sometimes you need to show up as a student. And, it's a really critical skill for leaders to have the ability to actually take away something from every conversation and realize that we can learn from everybody in the organization to make better decisions. And then the third thing was to take action. So after you've done the first two, you can really make decisions and take action based on an informed point of view. So this notion of listening, learning, and then taking action, Virajita, I think were, three critical things that I think from a cultural perspective that has happened at US Bank.
Thank you, Greg. We'll come back to the action question in a minute here, but I'm going to ask in the meantime something about equity and community representation. Please share an example of how your company has been able to better represent the local Minneapolis community from a racial, ethnic, or a gender standpoint. And let's go to Alyssa.
Yeah, so, I talked a little bit about how we had to close our stores. And Thursday, May 28th, we reopened our stores. And then we all know George Floyd was murdered the following Monday and the unrest started. So as a small business owner that lives in Minneapolis, spent many sleepless nights, could smell the smoke, helicopters overhead nonstop, checking in the middle of the night when I woke up my video footage at the stores to see if I had stores to come back to the next day. However, on the flip side, my heart hurting and also understanding why it was happening and hoping that something better could come of it. So, my team is looking to me for direction, and I wanted to be really thoughtful about how I responded to it, and that it was something that would create kind of show an ongoing commitment, not just, a food drive or kind of a one-off thing. So I remember, my team members coming, asking me for direction, and my direction was, if a store were to burn down, I am actually okay with that, right? If it is going to make the world better, I will be completely at peace with losing a store. And to me, that was a very powerful statement to say, and it represented my values as well as the values of my company. So in thinking about what to do, with that in mind, I was listening to Governor Walz, and he basically gave a statistic about the educational opportunity gap in Minnesota. I was born in Minnesota. I'm an educator. I also teach at the Carlson School, and I wasn't aware of that. So was really disappointed to hear that statistic, spent some time educating myself, talked to some organizations in town, and came in contact with the Northside Achievement Zone. So the Northside Achievement Zone is an organization that supports closing that educational opportunity gap for North Minneapolis little ones by supporting not only the little ones, but the whole family. And making sure that, you know, if somebody's hungry and worried about food, education can't be the first priority. So I really liked that approach that they took. So basically, as a company, we've made the commitment to donate 100% of our profits to that organization for this year. So one, you know, it makes me and my team feel a lot better that we're going to work each day to really help drive this impact in our community. And it's something really unique that I think local retailers can do to show their support, because it's basically saying everything I have, I'm willing to give to make Minneapolis better.
Thank you, Alyssa. It's truly inspiring to hear you talk about those moments where where everything's on the line, literally. And I think it has been on for many, many people in our region and beyond. But it's powerful to hear how you're working through those. Next, Mark, would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, I would. You know, I've recently been introduced to an organization called, Black Men Teach. And it was incredibly informative to me because I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. And so the reality of my experience was that I always saw people like me in places of authority. And what I found out through this organization in Minnesota is that the representation of Black teachers in high schools and throughout the school system has a very low representation. So people don't get an opportunity to see people of color in places of leadership. That can be so incredibly inspiring and uplifting to see someone like you. And so I will tell you that foundationally, we've done a number of things as an organization. And I would have to say this, I think Best Buy is amongst, has one of the most diverse boards in corporate America. 1/3 of our board is people of color. More than half of our board members are women. I think that representation is incredibly inspiring. I think it's so important. We've also recently signed something called the Parity Pledge, which is a commitment to interview at least one diverse candidate at the vice president level and above through our C-suite and across our boards. Again, I think representation is an inspirational force where people can see people doing something that looks like them, that is far above anything they could have imagined. I think that is an incredible step that we're making as an organization.
Thank you, Mark. I hadn't realized about the board representation, so that's inspiring because I have seen just a rush of different boards kind of trying to diversify in this moment, and to know that that was already in place is inspiring as well. So I'm going to go to another question about the future now. Predicting the new normal. In response to the challenges of 2020 so far, how have retail company values fundamentally changed, and how will those shifted values evolve in the years ahead? Let's go to Greg to start with that.
I think before I answer that, I wanted to just applaud Alyssa for her, what she just shared with us in terms of her commitment to NAS and education. I just think it's an incredible commitment, and I wanted to acknowledge that work. Virajita, I think that, one of the things that is important for us that has been a pivot, we're a financial services institution. And, when we look at where we can truly make an impact and drive differential outcomes, you have to look at the things like the racial wealth gap and the sheer impact that's having on every single one of us. The racial wealth gap currently stands at about $1.2 trillion, according to the most recent study. And closing that gap would actually add, anywhere from 4 to 6% in GDP growth. And so I have to do the banker talk. I'm not really a banker. I just play one on TV, but it's important in the context of your question, because the shift that it's required us to do is to really get focused on, you know, U.S. Bank and none of us individually as a corporation can sort of solve all the disparities that are in front of us. But what we can do is get really focused on some of these problems that are so persistent and so prevalent. And, you know, it's forced us to make some commitments and double down in some places where it's supporting folks like Alyssa and small businesses and their abilities to create jobs and to scale themselves and build vibrant communities. And so our over $100 million annual commitment to Black-owned businesses, I think, is noteworthy, not because of the number for any particular reason, but because of the focus and understanding how this notion of when we all win, we all win. And these communities are suffering, and we all belong to this one community, whether we live in North or South Minneapolis or not. It is our community. And so our commitment to small business is a commitment to the entire region and the prosperity of the entire region. The other thing it required us to do is to use different language. I think now, Viraja, it's really important. Words matter. And what I mean by that is we also made a commitment internally to advance Black leadership in our organization and all diverse leadership. But right now, it's important that we talk about Black leadership because when you look at data is unemotional, right? When you look at the data and where we need to focus, it was a courageous conversation to have within a financial organization and the industry as a whole to say, this is a pervasive problem on this segment in particular. And we love all of our children equally. But the data tells us that we've got a real persistent problem here. And so I would say, you know, the short answer is having this really crisp and precise focus on where we can move the needle the most effectively and looking both inside our organization and outside, and the role that businesses and economic inclusion play in driving the outcomes we all want to move the needle on is really important to talk about right now.
Thank you. That's excellent. It seems like what the pandemic has done is to accelerate the future, and the future we need to create is really one that's equitable and addresses all kinds of disparities. So it's great to hear how you're framing it. So I'm going to move to the last question, which is like the first question, a speed round. For our soon-to-be graduates in the audience entering the workforce, please share a one-sentence or one-word piece of advice for all their years ahead. And let's start with Mark.
Yeah, you know, I would share, you know, one of the things that I found that is so incredibly important. You know, a lot in the old days, people would make this emphasis around predictors of success. And they would actually try to use testing and other things to predict what would happen to people in the future. I think the reality is that we've learned is that number one, emotional intelligence, people that can empathize with others, people that can diffuse things that are arising in the workplace and bring people together is such a critical skill. The ability to enhance that conversational skill that communicates with others in a way that brings people along and inspires them to make a difference, I think is going to be critical as you move forward in your careers. I also think there's a bit around, like, how do you continue to give back, establish mentorships and menteeships in a way that supports people on a journey. I think this sets in motion this continuous learning stream where you're learning and growing and you're giving back, and it creates this cycle that is almost forever.
Great, thank you. How about Alyssa?
So I would say my biggest piece of advice is to be adaptable. So things are always going to continue to change. I've had a great career working in digital, and it's just such an exciting place to be in retail. But if you spend time waiting for things to go back to normal, it's never going to go back to normal because we're continuing to grow and evolve as a retail community, and just always being open to that and open to what's next, I think is really important.
Thank you, Alyssa. And Greg?
You know, I would say, always bet on yourself. You are as smart and as talented and as brilliant as you think you are. And I wish somebody had told me that earlier in my career. Sometimes we have imposter syndrome, and we don't think that we deserve the things that we wish for and we dream for. But I guarantee you, whatever you're dreaming for, it's not big enough. And you are as smart and as talented and as brilliant as you think you are.
Thank you so much for your insights and your wisdom, and also your persistence in your work. Really appreciate and your inspiring words today. I'm going to turn to our audience and attend to their questions that they've been asking. We'll take about 15 minutes for the questions that you've submitted throughout the evening. And let me start with the first question, which comes from Morgan. And the question is, what has been a personal or professional challenge that you have had to overcome this year? I know you all spoke about some of them, but is there one that stands out? And perhaps we can start with Alyssa.
Yes, I would say in times of stress, I tend to focus on what's next. And, I'm an action-oriented person, so I move immediately towards, COVID, right? I need to figure out how to solve it. I need to figure out how to pay the rent. What are my steps? And everyone handled, that situation as well as social unrest in their own different ways. And it was very emotional for a lot of folks. So a learning when I did a feedback session with my team was just to, let's slow down a little bit and let's make sure that we are taking the time to the feelings, openly talk about the feelings. So just making sure that, again, in times of extreme stress, sometimes certain, you go back to what you're comfortable with. But if you're leading a team and you're leading a company through, again, nobody could imagine anything of this magnitude, making sure that you are attending to the human side of things and making sure people in their journeys are getting the support they need to make it through to the other side as well.
That's great. Greg, what would you say to Morgan?
And Morgan, I would say the toughest part has just been transitions. In the quarantined environment, being able to turn it off and transition from work to personal time and space has been difficult because I've found that I just keep working. And, because you can do it and you're not changing environments. I think when we were in an office situation, it was a lot easier to make that transition from, work, whether it was the time you had alone in your car to just sort of being in a different physical environment, the transition was easier. And so, the tough part is when you do something that you're really passionate about, it also means you can burn out quicker because you're always working. And so this notion of doing a lot more, being just much more cognizant of self-care and my transitions is something that I'm working on.
Yeah. Greg, you're saying that we need to all learn boundaries anew, right?
Yes, there it is. That's exactly right.
So, Mark, would you like to add anything for Morgan?
Yeah, I'd say the same thing. This year has been an interesting year for me. I started this year as a supply chain professional. And so I made a career transition in the middle of, right before COVID happened, to diversity and inclusion. And so there is always this, when you step into something new, there's this, like, how do you learn and how do you get open and be willing to make mistakes and recover from those mistakes? And so that has been incredibly interesting, in addition to everything Greg just said, which is, when you're into something new, you typically want to overextend yourself. And so I've had to be able to really rely on people and communicate openly and honestly and reach out for support and help through this journey.
Right. Thank you, Mark. I mean, especially in the workplace environment and Zoom environments, I was thinking about openness. We have opened our homes. Our pets show up on screens and all kinds of things in this pandemic.
Yeah. Virajita, could I just add something to that, if it's okay? I also think it's important to say when you're not okay. I think our own wellness and mental health is something that doesn't get discussed enough. And I think what I've learned to do with colleagues and friends alike is to actually say when you're not okay, because I think it's helpful to share that and to receive what you need back from other people and to give it when necessary. And so I think that kind of transparency, Morgan, to your question around, just sort of talking about where you are in the space that you're in, and this notion of being vulnerable. I can't remember who talked about it earlier. This notion of vulnerability, I think, is absolutely critical right now as well.
Yeah, that's a wonderful thought. I think Mark mentioned sort of the notion of grace. Along with
Yes.
grace, we can also learn to call on it because we need to sustain ourselves. I've often thought that this pandemic isn't a sprint; it's a marathon, and perhaps a series of marathons with the terrain changing on us. So lots happening here. Our next question is from Olivia Rain. Were there any big wins for your company during the pandemic that you may not have seen otherwise? Anyone want to take it?
I'm happy to go. So with anything that's challenging, there's usually opportunities that come out of it as well. So obviously, we were able to find a lot of good new team members to join the team. So, obviously sad that there's been furloughs and layoffs, but really happy to add some of those team members to our team. And then there's some really good real estate deals going on right now. So we were able to kind of expedite our plans to open a new store, and we're opening in Wayzata on November 1st. So on Sunday, I'll be over in Wayzata. So really got some opportunities out of what's happened as well.
Great. Anyone else would like to go to the big win, your company? Mark?
Yeah, I guess I would say, we have in some ways learned our voice. We've always had, people call it the blue shirt, the esprit de corps of Best Buy. We've learned how to make a stand and articulate what we believe in a way, not just inside of our company, but outside of our company. As we've made bold statements about injustice, I think the pressure of what we saw helped us to exude what we deeply believed.
That's an excellent point. I think in many ways, even at the university, while we have been focused on some of those values, I think we have been challenged as well in being much more direct about the action and articulating them, especially for our students, like many in the audience, who will not let us off as we have in the past. They want to see action, and it's quite incredible. So I guess related to that, the one question that has been posed is, what can academia do that can mirror what some of these companies are doing in terms of equity? And so it's a really interesting question because, again, I think there's been ongoing work on equity, but we continue to struggle with more representation on our faculty and our staff. Our students are more diverse than the other two categories. And we need this kind of action around racial equity in every department, in every corner of the university. So I think one thing that strikes me listening to the three of you is we can do more to collaborate across our sectors. I recently was in a session by the Twin Cities Diversity and Inclusion Roundtable, and there's some incredible thought leaders and talent working on these issues and reflecting, especially in our political climate as well. That was very inspiring, and it made me think we need to work across sectors more. I'm going to take the next question here from Kristen. What are your favorite resources to educate yourself on racial equity? Would anyone like to go?
I can start on that one. I think, my favorite resources are rarely the resources that I typically would go to before. And what I mean by that is I've really, Kristen, challenged myself to try to find new inputs during this time. I think we are all sort of, I don't think we're all products of our own experiences, our life experiences, and it shapes our worldview, which by definition is going to be very narrow. And so I've tried to also surround myself with people who don't necessarily see the world as I do, because I fundamentally believe that you don't learn from a place of comfort. We've got to build some stamina around being uncomfortable. And that's the only way we will all learn and grow, is to sort of lean into this notion of discomfort. And so I found myself trying to tap into different news sources and, reading books and periodicals from authors and people who I typically wouldn't have picked up before. And then, I've become just sort of a rabid student of history, and doing that, the work of understanding that history is complicated and it is incredibly nuanced. And we have a tendency in this country to want to romanticize history in a very narrow way. And I think, this notion of sort of revisiting history from this much more nuanced place is something that I've found to be incredibly helpful. There's tons of book lists and all the TED Talks and all those kinds of things, which I think are quite useful as well. But I found it far more important to sort of do the self-examination work on what has informed my point of view to this point and how I can sort of expand that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Greg. We need to also keep learning these things, because the lessons of history are apparently lost on us as a society until we hear it over and over again, experience it, see it, and so on. I'm going to go to the next question because I'm taking a look at the time here. Charles asks, as you look to the future, what will be the next driving technology or practice that will impact retail? So this is a future-based question. So Alyssa and Mark after that.
The one thing I'm fascinated about is voice. So as someone who's worked in digital, how people adapted to using screens and then how they adapted to using littler screens, thinking about a lot of the shopping people will just be doing with voice. And what does a brand sound like, right? So if you're interacting and you can't visually see something, does your brand have an accent? Or, what words do they use when they engage with consumers if there isn't something to look at? So I do think something related to voice technology in terms of e-commerce is going to be very fascinating to watch in the next couple of years.
Great.
Yeah, I would also say, just to add on to what you just said, is that this piece around virtual technology and the ability, almost like this conference, to experience something and not truly need to be there. I think the retailing of the future is going to advance to the point where I can experientially interact with a product and then have it show up almost instantaneously at my front door based on what I want at that moment in time. I think it's going to be so incredibly powerful.
I'm going to go to the last question, which is, I think, perfect, because it really speaks to this, along with the intense transitions we've all had to experience. We've also felt a sense of isolation, despite the many Zoom meetings, right, that we're on. And so the question here from Caroline is, how do you stay connected with employees and coworkers over virtual communication? So how do you connect? Greg, do you want to go first?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, with coworkers, I try to do the little surprising, not the standard. I mean, we have our, for my team, we do our staff meetings every week, and I have my one-on-ones with my direct reports. But I've tried to do two things. One is, and this is beyond just my coworkers, but I do at least 2 phone calls to somebody in my LinkedIn network every week. It just, I don't know about you, but I don't get to LinkedIn very often. And so I try to just be more intentional about, messages that I've gotten. And I've been very successful the last month or so, just making 2 calls a week to somebody in my network just to learn more about them. So that has helped me a great deal. And then with colleagues, it's just that surprising call on somebody that I used to interact with a lot in person, that I'll just send them sort of an iChat or something now and just say, hey, I was just thinking about you, how you doing? And, you'd be surprised how far that goes for people just to know that you're thinking about them. So it's not always a transaction for me. It's also that relationship capital that I think Allison talked about earlier, is you can't lose sight of that. So.
Right.
Those are a couple of ideas.
Great. Mark?
Yeah, I love that. And I'm going to tell a quick story. Before COVID, my wife and I were sitting in a restaurant and we both had our cell phones out. And an older couple was sitting next to us and they tapped us on the shoulder and they said, "You guys should probably talk to each other." and so what I found that is so incredibly powerful is, in spite of the technology we're using, active listening and full engagement creates deep embodiment and connections. And so you can do that in many ways, shape, form, or fashion. You can actually create distance and be in the same room.
Right. Thank you, Mark. Alyssa?
So as a small retailer, I'm actually still going into work every day, which I'm very thankful for, obviously with many, many safety procedures. But one interesting thing is, I did mention I have some new team members that have joined since COVID. And there's people on my team that I haven't seen what their full face looks like. So I've only seen them from here up. So I'm wondering when this is all over, am I going to recognize them? But yeah, I'm very lucky to continue to be able to go out every day and really enjoy that.
Thank you. So thank you for your responses and thank you to the audience for all the thoughtful questions. Now, as we wrap up our evening, I would like to also go to the introductions, but before that, let me come back and thank our panelists. Thank you so much for your insights and your wisdom. It just opens up doors of our possibilities for not only for our students, but also for me at the university to think about how the world is changing from the lens of retail. So I'm going to go next to introduce Ha-Young Kim, Professor and Interim Department Head of Design, Housing and Apparel, DHA, and Director of the Center for Retail Design and Innovation.
Thank you to our speaker, panelists, and moderator for your insights and words of inspiration tonight. We really appreciate your participation. As we wrap up the evening, I have the honor of recognizing our distinguished advisory board member, and for the second year, announcing not just one student scholarship, but 6 Retail Connect student scholarships. I will start with our distinguished advisory board member, and this year, the award goes to Chris Woodbury, Supply Chain Logistics Director at Best Buy. Chris has been a valued member of our Retail Merchandising Advisory Board for 4 years. He led the Program Enhancements, Curriculum, and Student Academic Involvement Subcommittee by working with his group to develop the curriculum and a class that will bring in retail industry experts to discuss the most up-to-date topics and trends to keep our students informed on the ever-changing retail landscape. Chris has consistently brought Best Buy to the table as an event sponsor for Retail Connect, and he was instrumental in securing our keynote speaker and panelist from Best Buy this year. He is also generous with his time through guest lecturing in the classroom and mentoring our students. Most importantly, Chris is highly respected by his peers on the board. Indeed, he's an exemplary board member. Thank you, Chris, for your contributions to the College of Design and the Retail Merchandising program. Next, I would like to announce our Retail Connect Student Scholarship Awards for 2020. The scholarships are made possible thanks to our platinum sponsors, which are Target and GEMS, and gold sponsors, which are 3M, the Creative Partners Group, Deluxe, and the Carousel Motors Group. These awards are named on behalf of those sponsors annually. This year, I would like to present the Target Leadership and Diversity Award to Courtney Clark and the GM's Leadership and Diversity Award to Paige Ta. These two students have demonstrated leadership and championed equity and diversity on campus. Courtney, through her work on promoting diversity and inclusion in her sorority, and Pei as the president of the Malaysian Student Association. Each student will receive a 2,500 scholarship award. Congratulations. Next, our Student Leadership Awards, which are given to 4 retail merchandising students who have demonstrated extraordinary leadership in the classroom, on campus in various clubs and organizations, and in the community. They are passionate about retail, gaining various career experiences in the industry already. Each student will receive a 1,000 Leadership Award. They are the 3M Student Leadership Award to Olivia Rain, the Creative Partners Group Student Leadership Award to Annie Scogan, the Deluxe Student Leadership Award to Caroline Geiger, the Carousel Motor Group Award to Kirsten Wetterstrom. Congratulations to our award recipients. Lastly, new this year, I am thrilled to say that we are contributing 50% of our funds raised from sponsorship and individual support to the College of Design Scholarship Fund that advances diversity, equity, and inclusion in retail education. We are thrilled to contribute to the fund this year, and thank you so much to our sponsors for making this possible. Finally, I would like to thank you all for attending tonight's first ever virtual event, and thank you for making Retail Connect 2020 a huge success. Good night. See you next year.